Hello, welcome to Washington Talk. I'm Young Gyo-ken. Former Vice President Joe Biden, the projected winner of the November 3rd election, made a trip to a Korean War Veterans Memorial in his home state of Pennsylvania as the United States observed its National Veterans Day. And Biden spoke with South Korean President Moon Jae-in over the phone, reaffirming their commitment to the two countries' alliance and a peaceful Korean peninsula. As the president-elect, Biden continues with his transition plans, although President Donald Trump is challenging the results of last week's election. Today we'll discuss these and more. Joining us is Robert Gallucci, distinguished professor in the practice of diplomacy at Georgetown University. He was U.S. Ambassador at Large and Special Envoy for the U.S. Department of State. Ambassador Gallucci also served as the North Korean chief negotiator. Gary Seymore also joins us today. He is professor of the practice of politics at Brandeis University. Dr. Samore served in the U.S. government for over 20 years, including the role of a White House coordinator for arms control and weapons of mass destruction. Welcome to the program.
Thank you. Pleasure to be with you.
During his recent phone call with South Korean President Moon Jae-in, President-elect Biden called South Korea the linchpin of security and prosperity in the Indo-Pacific region. How important will the U.S.-ROK alliance be when Biden becomes the president, Ambassador Gallucci?
Well, I think that we start with what is for the United States a major threat to not only our own security here, but international security, the security of our allies in Northeast Asia. And when we think about, therefore, the North Korean threat, there's no way of us conceptualizing a response to that threat without considering our alliances, starting with the alliance with Seoul. So I'm not surprised that President Biden identified the relationship with the Republic of Korea as essential to American security, because we do think of it that way. I don't think that in explicit, narrow terms. We generally think of the alliance with the ROK as relevant to broader security issues in Northeast Asia, but I think it would be a mistake if we limited the impact on at least the psychology of the region to North Korea. I think for the way in which the United States thinks about its security in the Asia-Pacific region, the alliance with the ROK is relevant to the way in which other states see American presence.
Mm-hmm. What's your view on this, Dr. Seymore?
So I think one of the hallmarks of President Biden's foreign policy will be to try to strengthen the U.S. alliance system around the world, including in Asia, and repair some of the damage that President Trump did. And for the United States, the ROK is one of the key allies it has in Asia, not only in dealing with the North Korea threat, where Seoul is critical for both diplomatic efforts and for defense and deterrence, but also in the broader context of the U.S. position in Asia. So I think we'll see much closer and friendlier relations between the U.S. and the ROK under a Biden presidency, and fewer irritants and areas of disagreement that we've experienced under the last 4 years with President Trump.
How the U.S.-ROK alliance plays into the inter-Korean relations is also important. Inter-Korean relations have remained stalled, largely due to an impasse at the nuclear talks between the United States and North Korea. The Moon administration is pinning hopes on a restart of the stalled negotiations, seeming to be a little bit rushing, with Moon having just 1.5 years left in his presidency. Will the Biden administration see the inter-Korean economic initiatives differently from the Trump administration? Dr. Seymore.
So for the United States, one of the main points of leverage that the U.S. has with North Korea is the possibility for economic cooperation and assistance from South Korea to North Korea. And I think for the U.S. that will continue to be one of the main bargaining chips the U.S. has in its negotiations with North Korea. So I expect the U.S. will continue to coordinate with the ROK to make sure that inter-Korean economic relations are tied to progress on denuclearization.
Ambassador, how will the Biden administration view the inter-Korean relations?
Well, I agree with Gary Samore's take on this issue. I would hope, though, that the Biden administration will put our own economic relations, possible future relations with the DPRK, as well as North-South economic connections, in the broader context of normalization as something all of us want, rather than simply a big carrot that we hang out there if they perform on the nuclear issue. I know that's been the structure of the way we look at the engagement with the North, but I think the more we can move in the direction of embracing normalization as a mutual good for all of us, the better the context for that engagement. And I'm not predicting here anything specific about what the Biden team is going to do with the DPRK policy. I don't know what they're going to do. I certainly hope they do a policy review. But I would also be hoping that they would take a more, if I can use the word, enlightened view of the way we engage the North, which would also help North-South relations.
Mm-hmm. Meanwhile, South Korea's Foreign Minister Kang Kyung-hwa met some members of the Biden team in Washington and asked for the Biden administration's summit-level attention to reopen denuclearization talks with North Korea. It is widely expected that Biden will likely take a conventional bottom-up approach towards North Korea compared to Trump's top-down approach. What will Biden's approach look like, Ambassador?
A bottom-up approach. And I think it has the advantage of allowing professional diplomats to engage sort of complicated issues without the attention that a summit would bring. If you are asking about the policy process and what Biden is likely to do and what I would like him to do, I don't think there's anything wrong with wanting at some point to have a summit. I think you get some good feelings out of a summit if, in fact, the summit is endorsing an agreement the two countries have made at the working level and are prepared to accept. If you go to a summit meeting and you expect the two principals to hammer out an agreement, I think you ask too much. When Gary and I and others were involved in negotiating with the North 25 years ago, we did that for about a year and a half before we reached an agreement. With all due respect to the chairman and the president, they wanted to do that in a day and a half. And I don't think that happens. So I would like a more traditional approach to the process.
Dr. Samore, could you share your thoughts as well?
Well, I think candidate Biden has already indicated that he supports the approach that Bob suggested. During the presidential debate, Biden said he was willing to meet with Chairman Kim if it would advance denuclearization. And I think that presupposes that there's preparation for a summit meeting in the form of high-level talks to work out the details of an agreement. I think the more interesting question is whether or not Kim Jong-un is prepared to resume those nuclear negotiations that started under Trump but didn't get very far, or whether he's going to break the test moratorium and confront the incoming Biden administration with a new round of nuclear or long-range missile tests. And unfortunately, the recent history here is not very encouraging, because in the past, North Korea has tended to greet any incoming administration with new tests in order to establish their credibility and increase their bargaining leverage. Of course, we don't know what North Korea will do. They've been silent on the election so far. But I think the immediate challenge for the Biden administration and for Moon Jae-in is to try to discourage North Korea from conducting tests. And that involves diplomatically. I think the Biden administration has to make clear early on that they're prepared to continue the nuclear diplomacy based on the Singapore Summit Declaration, and that the Biden administration is willing to abide by the understanding that Trump and Kim had on a test moratorium and limits on USROK military exercises. Now, whether or not Kim accepts that offer, we just don't know yet. But if he doesn't, we'll go into another cycle of sanctions and testing, which will delay, I think, for some period of time, any resumption of nuclear diplomacy.
North Korean state media have so far made no mention of Biden's electoral victory. Will Kim Jong-un seek to engage with Biden just as he did with Trump, Dr. Samore?
Well, I certainly hope so. I mean, I think there's an argument that Kim Jong-un needs some relief for the North Korean economy, which has been weakened by maximum pressure sanctions. And who knows what the effect of COVID has had on the North Korean economy. So the US and the ROK, working with other countries like China, need to make clear that the path is open to resume nuclear diplomacy. And a successful steps toward denuclearization would include, as Bob suggested, normalization of relations with the United States, opportunities for economic cooperation and assistance, steps toward establishing a peace regime, like a declaration ending the war. I'm not sure any of that will be effective, but the challenge, I think the immediate issue for the Biden administration is how to extend the moratorium on testing and resume nuclear talks, which of course will likely be difficult and protracted. And then we'll have to see whether Chairman Kim is willing to accept that offer.
Ambassador, what kind of move Kim Jong-un will take when the Biden administration comes in?
I think all of us have been through the experience of the North Koreans establishing their standing with the new administration by reminding everyone that they pose a threat. So I join, I hope, most people thinking about this, that we don't have to go through that back and forth, and we can skip it and go directly to those negotiations. I think it's possible. I don't think it is necessarily particularly significant that the North has not come up on the screen and sent congratulations to President Biden. That to me is less important than a willingness, indeed, and almost an enthusiasm on the part of the North to get a serious engagement with the United States and ultimately with the ROK as well, to get going with that. And if we can talk about what we care about, but also what they care about, and that's not only sanctions. I imagine sanctions based upon the Hanoi experience will be at the top of their list, but they're still interested in what the United States does in terms of military exercises, unilaterally and jointly with the Republic of Korea. So I think there are things we can do that go to, whether they're military, political, or economic, that go to an American enthusiasm, particularly for normalization. I think what the Biden administration ought to be looking to is how we could establish an interest in normalization that addresses fundamental North Korean concerns about America's threat to its security and how that connects to its nuclear weapons program.
Mm-hmm. Then, Ambassador, in order for the U.S. to resume the talks with North Korea, what should be laid out as the foundation?
Well, I don't think you lay out too much beforehand. I think the position, I would guess, should be one of openness to engagement with the North. It's never a good idea to entirely assume that you know exactly what the other side wants and come to a conclusion about what you're going to offer them of what it wants. I think listening to their concerns as they evolve over time would be a nice way to start. I think simply getting clear that the new president, the president-elect's agenda is for serious engagement with the North at a professional level that would ultimately result in a settlement that would be in the North's interest, as well as in the interest of the countries in the region and the United States. That's the way to go.
Mm-hmm. Dr. Samore, do you agree with this view?
Yes, I agree with that. I think the most important thing for the Biden administration to do is to communicate directly to North Korea that the U.S. is prepared to resume nuclear negotiations based on the Singapore Summit Declaration, and that the U.S. will continue to honor the understanding between Trump and Kim on a test moratorium and U.S. ROK military exercises. And we will have to hope that Kim Jong-un accepts that offer, which will then begin negotiations. And the details of what an agreement would look like, what is offered, what is given, what is demanded, all of that will have to be worked out in the course of those difficult negotiations. I don't think that's something you need to lay out at this point. The important thing is to avoid a new round of testing and to get a process of negotiation started.
The question I have here is, Dr. Samore, should South Korea try again to play the role of a facilitator, or should the United States go and approach directly to North Korea?
My recommendation would be a direct American approach to North Korea, and there are many different ways one could achieve that. Everything from a direct communication from Biden through U.S. communications with North Korean officials around the world. But I think it helps for other countries to contribute to that communication, and that would include the ROK as well as China and others.
Mm-hmm. What about you, Ambassador, your view?
I don't think the role of Seoul as an intermediary is essential here. I think the role of Seoul as an enthusiastic participant with the United States in serious negotiations, that is essential. I think we want, and here in the United States, we want whatever negotiating track we should be fortunate enough to get on, we want our allies along with us. And principally, that means the ROK in Japan. And of course, at the end of the day, we're going to need at least the acquiescence, if not the enthusiastic support of Beijing.
Biden has committed to an early meeting with South Korean President Moon Jae-in. What kind of chemistry can we expect from them, considering their liberal political background? Dr. Samore, do you think they will share similar philosophies in their foreign policies, especially in dealing with North Korea, when Moon's political project is very tied up with rapprochement and engagement with the North?
I don't know that Biden and Moon Jae-in know each other very well. I'm not sure whether they've had many contacts in the past, but I do think they share some important similarities going beyond security on the Korean Peninsula. And President Biden, or candidate Biden, has certainly emphasized the importance of values in what he hopes will be his new foreign policy, emphasizing democracy and human rights and so forth as an important element that was missing in Trump's foreign policy. That would seem to be very congruent with President Moon Jae-in's past as a champion of human rights and democracy. So I think that's an area in which the two will have some common interests. Of course, how that applies to North Korea is a tricky matter, because the North Koreans is not a democracy. They do not practice human rights. And Biden has already called Kim Jong-un a thug. So to the extent that they have a common interest in human rights and democracy, how you apply that to North Korea is going to be a challenge, because it could complicate efforts to make progress on security issues.
Mm-hmm. Ambassador Gallucci, your final thoughts?
In terms of temperament, there's every reason to think that President and President Moon will get on very well, and that there's not a lot of daylight, I don't think, in a policy sense, between what they hope to accomplish with the North. There may be a tad more enthusiasm for near-term economic engagement by Moon Jae-in, but I think that's not a particularly huge gap between the two. So I'm expecting that the chemistry will be good and that the alliance will be in good shape.
Mm-hmm. In the phone conversations with the leaders of South Korea, Japan, and Australia, Biden reassured Asia-Pacific allies of the U.S. commitment to the region. As the political climate in the U.S. is moving towards a change, many people are watching closely how this will impact the geopolitical landscape of the Asia-Pacific region, including the Korean Peninsula. Ambassador Gallucci and Dr. Samore, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you.
Thank you, Young-ya.
And that does it for this week's Washington Talk from Voice of America. Please join us again next week for more analysis.